Welcome everyone to our Symposium on Good Mental Health for Autistic Girls and Women. I'm so grateful for you all to be here today. I'm Katie and I'm today's MC, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Yellow Ladybugs. On behalf of our committee and board, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to each of you and thank you so much for coming. I hope you get a lot out of it because we've found the speakers we've brought to you today have got such a great wealth of knowledge. And I know a lot of you have made a really huge effort to come here, travelling some distance for some of you, so we're very grateful. So in case you haven't heard of Yellow Ladybugs, we're dedicated to the happiness, success and celebration of autistic girls and women. And in addition to raising awareness about the presentation, our real goal is to make sure that autistic girls and women are accepted and supported in all areas, including education, employment, health sectors and the wider community. We really do try to create positive, inclusive experiences for our tribe, and we support identity-first language, which you may hear today, and we uphold the values of nothing about us without us, which means that we're really proud to be an autistic-led organisation with many women on our committee and board being autistic. So today we're here to discuss a very important topic, good mental health. I'm so grateful to all our speakers here today. Thank you for coming. We're so lucky to have a strong voice for our tribe and professionals who truly live and breathe this space. Thanks to the generous support of the Department of Health and Human Services for their sponsorship, because we wouldn't be able to deliver these kinds of events, so we're very grateful. Just a few housekeeping items. Bathrooms are located right outside the venue if you just go down into the main corridor and turn right. We weren't able to turn off the hand dryers because of their requirements, but if you are in the bathrooms, we ask you to maybe reconsider using them and using the hand towels for sensory sensitivities. And if you do need a sensory break, you're welcome to go outside at any time into the foyer for some quiet time. If there's anything else you need, let me know. So a bit about today. What are we going to have today at our event? Well, basically the format is a TEDx style event, which means we'll have one speaker present after the other. We've really tried to include as many valuable speakers as possible, and we hopefully will get to some questions towards the end, depending on time. So why an event on mental health and why autistic girls and women? Studies show that autistic females can often present differently to their male peers. This can result, and I often say this, as them being misdiagnosed, misunderstood, or missed completely. Autistic females may often mask their traits, which means they could be less identifiable and often diagnosed later than boys. I know that was in our experience the case. And as a result, they may not receive appropriate support. We have uncovered so many misconceptions that we hear from our community time and time again. We often hear she's just shy, she's social, she can't be autistic, and all of these comments are extremely unhelpful. So we went away and we discussed with some professionals, autistic women, teachers, to develop some sort of list of traits that we thought would at least open people's minds to how females may present, to get a better picture of how diverse the spectrum can be. And I know some of you have got the resource that we were able to hand out today. That does have this list in there, and it's not at all conclusive. So it's just a guide to, share with your teachers or professionals if you're finding that there's a lot of those misconceptions happening. So why do autistic women and girls experience greater mental health challenges? Well, we've heard time and time again through studies that anxiety levels are higher in autistic females than their male peers. Why? Why is that? Is it the internalised and hidden anxiety that we hear so much of from our community? Is it society's expectations? Is it a lifetime of masking, a lack of acceptance, a lack of understanding? Is it the empath factor where you feel so much and it's too much sometimes? These are so many interesting questions that we hear time and time again. And we've chosen this topic because our community have told us that mental health is an area where much more needs to be done. Autistic females are especially vulnerable. They are both more likely to experience mental health challenges, and also they face the barriers to access the health support services they actually really do need. So it's twofold, and we need to address this. Our research tells us that this experience is for autistic females in every walk of life, whether they have forged a meaningful career or whether they're young or older, whether they live in a city or in rural communities. It does not discriminate, and we need to break down those barriers and start addressing it. Poor mental health can have a profound impact on our girls and women and their ability to function in day-to-day life. We know that autistic females are likely to experience some form of isolation or exclusion. And on top of this, they struggle with the toll of having to survive day in, day out, navigating the workplace, going to school, the challenges of parenthood, or simply stepping out into a world that is such a sensory onslaught that it's just too much to hold in. Whatever their mental health experience, we need to ensure that all autistic females are supported according to their individual needs. Today, we will begin to dive deeper and have a closer look at these topics. But we are just hitting the tip of the iceberg. We take this matter very seriously at Yellow Ladybugs. We've submitted reports to the UN, spoken at parliamentary inquiries. We've worked with the government to develop events like this because we want to bring the issues to the forefront. And even recently, we made a submission to the Victorian Commission of Mental Health to make sure that we really get our tribe heard. But we still think there's so much more to do, and I call on each and every one of you to join us and go forward in helping make this change, not just for yourselves, not just for your daughters, but for all the generations that have gone by of autistic women not being understood, not supported, or not accepted. We want them celebrated. We owe it to them and we owe it to us. We need to hear more about autistic shutdowns, learn about it, autistic burnout. We need to learn about triggers and de-escalation strategies that might help them or us. We need to hear directly from the lived experience of our tribe. We need health professionals, teachers, parents and allies to listen to what's going on, and there are so many amazing ones that get it. We just need more. We need acceptance, understanding and support. We need to break down these stereotypes. Autistic women are everywhere. We are your doctors, we're your teachers, we're your mums, your chefs, the woman sitting next to you on the train, we're the lecturer delivering to a room full of students. We have to stop the stereotypes of who we are, and we need change. And change begins with listening. Deep, deep listening, and we have got some amazing speakers to listen to today. So let's begin. Oh, thank you. So, that was a bit of a passionate, yes, let's do this. Because it is exactly what we all feel. And so thank you so much for listening to that intro. I hope it gives a good foundation of what we're here for today. So I'm going to begin with introducing you to Ebony, who has spoken at so many of our sold-out events in the past. She's so popular in our community. She's a teacher, which is amazing. She's a neurodevelopmental therapist, education consultant, and music specialist. And Ebony was diagnosed as an adult. And each presentation, she's revealed a bit more layers about herself and her insight. And we've enjoyed listening to her so much. I'm so grateful for her to be here today. If you could give her a warm welcome, thank you.
Clinical depression, generalised anxiety disorder, specific phobia with panic attacks, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, misdiagnosis, and autism. This is my list of personal diagnoses, past and current, and experiences with mental health-related conditions. Generalist classroom teacher, special education teacher, teacher of the deaf, neurodevelopmental therapist, and education consultant. This is my list of professional occupations that have given me experiences of mental health conditions. When asked to do this presentation, I thought, how do I fit years of experiences of mental health, and specifically of anxiety, into 15 minutes? My answer? Relate it to something I know, something that everybody knows, a universal language, music. I want you all to think of a song. Do it now. Any song you like, and just keep it in your mind. Anxiety is like a song. Just like a song, anxiety can be unpredictable. Or in fact, it can be predictable, when one always experiences anxiety at certain times or in response to certain situations. Like a song, anxiety can be, and likely is, repetitive. It never goes away. You never forget it. A song is always in your head, even if you're not listening to it, even if you're not singing it, and so is anxiety. Think about that song that I just asked you to pick. Just thinking about it can trigger emotions. You don't actually need to be hearing that song to feel it. Anxiety is the same. One doesn't need to actually be in an anxiety-provoking situation to feel it. Just the thought of that situation, just a memory, that's enough. Like a song, one thinks of anxiety about when it's over. Sorry, just find my place. It can vary in intensity, like the volume of a song. Once a song starts, it keeps going. You can turn it off and you can turn it down, but it takes effort, and anxiety is just the same. We need anxiety in our lives, just like we need music. But certain types of music, certain types of anxiety don't have a good effect on us. Like music, anxiety affects people differently. I will experience my own anxiety differently from how my husband will, just as he and I will experience different reactions to the same song. I had an epiphany just a couple of weeks ago that, like a song, we don't often know how our anxiety is affecting other people. If I don't ask somebody why they don't like a song, they'll probably just say, I just don't like it, or just turn it off. But I won't understand what it is about that song that they don't like. It's the same with anxiety. I won't know how my anxiety affects other people unless I actually ask them. Your children may need assistance with this, help to realise that their anxiety is actually affecting you or their siblings. But of course, not in a way that makes them feel they are the cause of that or feel negatively about themselves because of it, because they need you to understand how their anxiety is affecting them. Think again about that song you picked before. A recorded song doesn't change. The same song by the same artist is the same. It doesn't change. But the effect it has on you may change over time or from day to day. My anxiety doesn't change. It's my ability to manage it and to function with it that changes. I recently had someone ask me, how's your anxiety been? And I said, it's the same. Actually, no, it's a bit better. Actually, no, it's probably a lot worse. I don't know, it's just normal. I was asked by someone different to explain what anxiety felt like, and I replied, what do you mean? They repeated, what does it feel like? What do you feel physically and mentally? I said, I don't know. It's just me. It's just normal. I've recently discovered that teachers can assume that students they've identified as having anxiety themselves know what they're actually experiencing and assume that that student is receiving assistance for that anxiety. This is not the case. And many students, particularly girls on the spectrum, may just think that anxiety is their normal, because for them, it is. It doesn't go away. It's like when you're playing a song in your house and the neighbours are playing their music 10 times louder. My song of anxiety from my house is still on. It's still there, but it's just softer. So often, even when I'm happy, even when I'm relaxed, even when I am on top of the world, my song of anxiety is still there. But the song of happiness at that particular time is just louder, like the neighbours' music. But as soon as the neighbours stop playing their music, I can hear my song again. So how do we support girls and women on the spectrum with anxiety or other mental health needs? Acceptance and acceptance. I feel there are actually 3 forms of acceptance, 2 that we need and 1 that we don't. The first one that we don't need is a new term that I'm going to coin today. Acceptance. E-X-C-E-P-T-A-N-C-E. That's the acceptance where people say, I accept you for who you are, except when you do this. I accept you for who you are, except I won't invite you to my party. I accept you for who you are, except, etc., etc., etc. This is what your daughters, students, friends, etc. don't need. The 2 that we do need are acceptance from others and self-acceptance. I didn't have the chance that those who were diagnosed young to have self-acceptance. There are many young speakers out there, many young advocates, children, teenagers and young adults doing a wonderful job speaking so eloquently about their experiences. I too am essentially a child, a young child in fact, with only 5 years of existing with me with an official diagnosis and not even 2 years speaking about it publicly. I have a long way to go on the self-acceptance path, and that's okay because I'm a baby. There may be a number of you in the audience today or watching this recording who are also adult babies in this sense. If you don't truly accept yourself yet, it's okay. And if you can't talk about all of your experiences, like many people, young people can, that's okay. You're not alone, but keep going. You'll get there. Just as we need to support these young people to continue along their path of self-acceptance, we need to support each other too. Which brings me to the second required form of self-acceptance, acceptance from others. Surround your ladybugs and yourselves with people who genuinely understand their experiences. Not just people who understand, but people who unconditionally accept them without any exceptions. I'm yet to do this, and I know that it's my biggest barrier to positive mental health. It's so important, and it makes the world of difference to be in the company of a peer who has experienced the same as you. So number 1 is acceptance. Number 2 is communication. When someone is experiencing any form of mental health challenge or what is referred to as a meltdown or a shutdown, asking what they need or what you can do to help is supportive, but usually impractical. Evenly, as a fluently speaking adult, I can't always answer during these times. So ask yes/no questions, so the individual can nod or shake their head. Do you want me to stay with you? Do you want me to stop talking, etc.? Number 1, acceptance. Number 2, communication. Number 3, find what will save that person in that moment, and don't be offended if that thing isn't you. I love water. I need water. I crave water. The beach is my happy place, or even a lake will do. Water has saved me. I love music. I need music. I crave music. Music has saved me. Or more specifically, Josh Groban has saved me. I really probably owe him a dinner or 2. The difficulty with mental health is that it's often invisible. Last year in the April holidays, I spent 5 whole days in shutdown, not able to speak for more than a few sentences most of the time. I lay in a bed in a dark room with a TV on while my sister bought me food and water. When I returned to work 3 weeks later, most of my clients said, "How was your holiday? Where did you go?" They had no idea I was anything but relaxed and enjoying myself. And I assume the same would be for days like today. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just be present in the space, in the house, in the schoolyard. You don't even need to talk about anything. You don't even need to do anything. Just be there in case your child, your student, your person, whoever they are, needs you. To all of the girls and women on the spectrum listening to this event today, there are people who will understand you. They do exist. A couple of them I've been looking directly at during this presentation to allow me to get through it. They will understand you. They do exist. Just keep searching until you find them. Thank you.
I just think that deserves another round of applause because that was so brave. And Ebony has just delivered another very powerful talk, and that's what it's all about, and that's why we exist, because like Ebony said, it's about finding people who truly understand you, and we're uniting them through yellow. So thank you, Ebony, so much. Wow, I just catch my breath after that. That was very emotional. So we're going to keep the momentum going with amazing speakers, and I'd love to introduce Clem to our stage in a moment. So Clem is actually new to our Yellow Ladybugs speaking panel. We're so excited to have found Clem. She's an amazing advocate. So she's a cultural commentator, screenwriter, award-winning journalist, and all-round awesome girl. Where are you? And Clem was actually diagnosed with autism last year at the age of 36, and has said that with the clarity of the diagnosis, she now sees her life through a prism of understanding, and has never felt more comfortable being herself. And she's such a proud autistic woman. I'm so glad to have her here. I've heard she rocks an amazing cosplay costume, although you did say you were going to wear it today, but that's okay. And I know some of you are fans of her writing, so we're really proud to have Clem here today, so please give her a warm welcome.
Yes, I'm sorry to say I couldn't find my Wonder Woman uniform, but maybe next time. I would just like to begin by respectfully acknowledging the traditional owners of the unceded land on which we're gathered, the Boonwurrung and Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that thanks to any elders who may be present today. So as Katie said, I'm a bit of a polymath. I have a lot of strings to my bow, which I now realise is one of the many wonderful things about my autism. But as I was preparing to speak today, Katie asked me to think about the notion of what I wish I'd known when I was younger. So, as you've just heard, I am one of the growing number of women diagnosed with autism spectrum conditions later in life. My congratulations moment came last year when I was 36. Some people responded like this was something new. Oh, now she's autistic? But as I and those, I feel like that is relatable to many of you, as I and those closest to me knew, I had been autistic since birth. Like many who receive a diagnosis later on, the news provided me with a filter and a framework within which I could understand almost everything that had happened in my life leading up to that point. It explained why I could master some complex skills with laser-like focus. One of the most common things people say to me is, "How are you so good at that too?" And it also explained my wit and my unconventional approach to my writing, my deep empathy, and why I found it so satisfying to stand in the fruit shop patting a watermelon for 5 minutes straight. See also bag of rice, eggplant. But it also explained the way I spent my early school years mimicking cool girls and TV characters in an occasionally vain attempt to make friends. The 2 years I spent echoing everything I just said under my breath immediately after I said it. The social anxiety, the nose picking to the point of self-harm, the crushing homesickness that made sleepovers and school camps a fraught experience, the laissez-faire approach to deodorant, the confusion around gender, the merciless bullying at school, rampant anxiety and depression, the unfinished university courses, the way I felt confused and dizzy in busily decorated public spaces and shirked from certain sounds that others didn't seem to be able to hear, and the tantrums. Oh, the tantrums. Now, as a happy and reasonably confident autistic woman, I can see that those tantrums were in fact meltdowns. So when I think about what I wish I'd known when I was younger, the answer clear as day is, I wish I knew I was autistic. Friends and family members of daughters who they suspect are on the spectrum and are considering getting them assessed often ask me, I'm really worried that she's going to be labelled. And it's true that growing up is difficult for everyone, except for maybe that one school friend of mine who was a ballroom dancing champion. And it's true that a label like autistic or Aspie or on the spectrum might seem scary to consider for your daughter or loved one. But when you're growing up well aware of the fact that you're very different from your peers, sometimes a label is the very thing you need. And there are worse ones. Some of the labels that were applied to me before we had a framework with which to understand and support my behaviour included difficult, angry, selfish, remedial, incompetent, weird, and a number of ableist slurs that I won't repeat here. Or the day I looked at my sports teacher's notes and discovered that I, until that moment, someone who enjoyed running, had inappropriate arm swing. Cue 15 years of avoiding sports and exercise. If someone had taken me aside at 10 or 15 and explained something along the lines of, your brain is so good at some things, like art and performing, that it doesn't have much room left for others, like maths or socialising, a huge weight would have been lifted from my shoulders. Labels like dumb or incompetent have a habit of sticking. Once we leave school, it may be that nobody calls us those things out loud, but those words burrow down into our minds and memories. I'm now a PhD candidate, having received my master's with a high distinction in 2017. But prior to that, I dropped out of 3 different university courses across a decade. There was always a part of me that thought back to school and went, yeah, you're probably too dumb for this. Now, as one of only 10 Vice-Chancellor's scholars at RMIT, I can see that it was precisely because of my unique and autistic approach to research and writing that my PhD proposal was received so warmly. Often, when autistic people focus on the positives, in inverted commas, we're accused of a rose-tinted view of the world. Surely, neurotypical people exclaim, being autistic is actually terrible news and a tragedy. And sure, I won't lie to you, there are many challenges that I continue to face on a daily basis, even as an autistic woman with reasonably low support needs. In the privacy of my own room, I'm still prone to meltdowns. Rest in peace, the DVD cover that I couldn't open, so I attacked with a chisel and a hammer shortly before jumping on it like Donald Duck. It still didn't open. Who knew? There are some behaviours and tics that I just don't talk about with neurotypical people because I know that to them they are utterly abject. But I have truly come to see my autism as not just the icing on top of some of my triumphs and strengths, but actually key to them and the entire cake. I'm certainly not alone in this. Autistic women like Professor Temple Grandin, comedian Hannah Gadsby, and former Olympic swimmer turned writer and artist Casey Legler have all discussed the role their autistic thinking plays in their work. All of them, as I have found the thing they love, their special interest, and found a way to incorporate it into their working lives. But for those ladybugs out there who are still 5 or 10 years away from the working world, or who, like me, mistrust late capitalism and the neoliberal notion that we all need to work, take that special interest and make it a full-time hobby. There is no surer insurance against depression. For me, one of my most special interests, as Katie mentioned, has always been making costumes and props and dressing up. I've been that guy at the costume party ever since I was about 3. And I've never been more profoundly depressed than the 2 or so years within which I told myself, staring down the pressures of neurotypical expectation of adulthood, that dressing up was for kids and I should spend my money and time elsewhere. Now I dress up 4 or 5 times a year, A decade ago, I discovered the cosplay world and never looked back. I even managed to turn that special interest into paid work, teaching a short course at RMIT in thermoplastics and costume fabrication techniques. Ironically enough, cosplay has also introduced me to many of my neurodiverse friends. Nerds, who knew? Without the understanding of my autistic place in the universe, anxiety and depression were a huge part of my life, and I am in fact diagnosed triple threat, autistic, anxiety and depression. And that is not to say that now that I understand my autism, I'm completely free of either, but I know why some traditionally neurotypically geared approaches to anxiety and depression didn't work for me. If we subscribe to the social model of disability, and I think we should, then I often wonder how much of my anxiety and depression was a normative response to existing as neurodiverse in a neurotypical world. Do I feel anxious and panicked in the library at university because there's something wrong with me? Or is it because the carpet is ridiculously patterned, the walls are glass, the stairs are floating steps that I have huge gaps in them that make me feel like I'm going to fall down them? Am I incapable of holding down a real job? Or is the modern open plan office designed in such a way that it creates sensory overload? When autistic people talk about creating a world that is sensory friendly, some neurotypicals bristle at the notion, like we're suggesting we want everybody wrapped in cotton wool, which I admit would be very comfy. The irony is, in a sensory friendly world, much like a more accessible world, is better for everybody, including neurotypicals. I've worked from home as a freelance journalist for the majority of my adult life, because there I can control the environment around me. When I briefly worked in the office at a major newspaper, I felt ashamed that I apparently couldn't handle the fast-paced world of journalism, and I left after 6 months. Autistic girls and women, you may be aware, are champions at feeling shame. Now I know how much the noise and the furnace-like thermostat of the open plan office had to do with my reduced capacity to work and create in that environment. And I bet if those features were addressed, the general stress levels of the staff would be greatly lowered. And God knows people in print media have got enough stress on their plates in this day and age. So now that, a little joke for myself, so now that I know what I know, what wisdom can I impart to fellow ladybugs and their families, young and old? Firstly, if anybody tries to say, well, aren't we all a bit on the spectrum? Shut them down. No, we're not. The autism spectrum begins and ends with autism. It doesn't start at neurotypical, even if some of us are very good at pretending to exist in that world. I like to think of it like Pokemon, which itself is a very autistic metaphor. But if we think about individual autistic traits as Pokemons, your average person might have a few of them. They may also have social anxiety or a sensitivity to light or sound. But in order to officially get on the spectrum, you have to, as it were, catch them all. And then, depending on where you sit on the spectrum, some of your Pokemon might be more evolved than others. Listen, I just really love Pokemon. Also, I encourage people, especially neurotypical people who know and love autistic people, to reject functioning labels. They have a very checkered history that I don't have time to decry here, but in short, high functioning is used to deny support and low functioning is used to deny agency. The neurotypical world places a high premium on talking as the only form of communication. Autistic people know that there are many ways to communicate, and there are some so-called non-verbal autistic people writing some of the most elegant and emotionally insightful novels and poetry around. I might be considered high functioning. In fact, it wasn't until I started trying to write screenplays that I realised I really struggled with emotions. So thanks, screenwriting. This is really funny and well plotted, Clem, but we just don't understand what any of the characters are thinking or feeling. Neither do I. We just don't know what the lead character's problem is. She seems a lot like you. So the worst thing about anxiety and negative thinking for me is how real it feels at the time, and I think that's true of anybody who experiences anxiety. And it's especially true in childhood and adolescence, and I do think a more careful, softly approach is appropriate for younger people. But for the ladybugs who are a bit older, you could try my favourite anti-anxiety exercise, which I call the bin. So you get yourself one of those cute little bins that you can get from office supply shops or a jar, whatever. Every time you say or think something negative about yourself, write it down, fold it up and put it in the bin. After a week, you get to take them out and read them. Believe me, you will be roaring with laughter. It's a really great way to realise that sometimes the worst anxious thoughts are just that, thoughts, also the worst. Next, find some portable stims to take with you in moments you might feel stressed out. To anybody else, this is just a pen, and this is just a laptop cover. But to those in the know, so stingy. I've also finally realised how important exercise and activity is for battling depression. I know none of us want to hear that. Think back to the sports teacher's notes, inappropriate arm swing, and how they ruined my love of organised movement for years. When I used to get angry if somebody suggested exercise might help my low mood, I now see it was buried trauma about sports class. Try lots of things and see what you like. It might be dancing or yoga or boxing or running. One of my autistic friends is really into Muay Thai at the moment and she wants to spar with me and I'm really scared. Equine therapy is wonderful for Asperger girls. I have discovered weightlifting 3 years ago and never looked back. And once again, I've met many fellow autistic people in that world and we all get very mad when the plates aren't put back in order. But the biggest advice I can give to parents of autistic girls and to autistic women young and old is to embrace autism and use it to help you find your tribe. When I visit my younger autistic relatives who live interstate without much support, we all relish being able to, as I put it, tune in to the alien frequencies. And we monologue about special interests and stim together for hours. When you're young and you feel like nobody understands you, or even when you're older and feel that way, there's nothing like meeting other autistic people who can say, yeah, me too. Yes, when you first receive the news or have your suspicions, the word autistic might stick in your throat. You might tie yourself up in knots trying to describe it any other way, spectrum-y, ASD, or some other euphemism. But I think the number one way to combat depression and anxiety in girls and women with autism is to embrace it. So if you're like me and you're autistic, I reckon that's rad. And so do so many other people, so get out there and meet them. Thank you.
No, that was amazing, Clem. Honestly, very grateful for you coming up and speaking so eloquently. It's an eye-opener and I can't wait to the community online get to hear this as well because we're so lucky to be in this room today. I don't think I've ever heard so many amazing speakers all together. Oh, I mean, I organised the event and I'll say that, but tick, tick so far. Well done. Okay, well, no pressure, Michelle. Michelle, Dr. Michelle, I have heard you speak before, so I do know you're an amazing speaker. And she's brought the beautiful sun from the sunshine from Queensland today. So I'm so pleased to introduce Michelle to speak to you today. And she's got over 20 years' experience developing expertise in this field. And she was actually one of the first to develop a screening instrument for Asperger's. And she obtained a PhD for research on autism in 2007 and has co-authored 3 books. We've got a lot of authors in the room today with Professor Tony Atwood. She's known to our community as an ally and a guru on autistic girls and women. So we're very proud to have Dr. Michelle here today. Please welcome her.
Thank you. What a wonderful welcome. I'm just so honoured to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Katie. This is my current passion. So as you can see from my bio, I've kind of had a special interest in autism for a while. And the slide, sorry, I didn't say, I've co-authored another book on girls and women. I'm so proud of it. And Barb Cook, I forgot to mention it earlier, sorry. But Barb Cook and I co-authored this wonderful volume. It's edited by Barb and I, but there's 15 autistic women contributors, and it's just the most awesome book. And Jan is here, who's also a co-author with me. Thank you. It's a great book. Thank you. I have a slide on it later, but I just felt it's missing there. There's a lot to say, and I'm going to jump in and try and start. When I started to prepare this, I spent too long on the slides to present what the issues are, and kind of coming in today belatedly realised that you'll all know what those issues are. So I've really truncated the start of my talk today and to 3 slides just on what I feel some of the major issues are that can then lead to mental health concerns later, or suffering later. And then I want to talk about some of the ideas that we've started to use over the last decade or so at Minds and Hearts, which is where I work on a daily basis in Brisbane, a clinic I started 15 years ago, specifically for what we called back then Asperger's syndrome, but autism as well. And before I dive into what I want to communicate to you today, I just wanted to say a word on the languaging. It's really changed since I started 25 years ago. When I studied autism, we were taught to use person-first language, and being able to change now, I feel it's tricky. It's hard for me to immediately embrace the disorder is the other word that I've been taught as well. So these conditions, disorders, it's not helpful. It's absolutely not helpful to use these terms. And certainly both Tony and I have spent a lot of time with this question, and which terms do we use, because the last thing we want to do is to create the stigma, marginalisation, the alienation that's so prevalent in our society still, unfortunately. So the terms that I use are very varied, and that's really about a recognition across the many people that I work with and have over the years, that there's many terms that sit differently with different people. So I tend to use all of them. And whoever I'm with, I ask, which do you like best? And that's what we use. But you'll see with my slides, it reflects the all of them bit. So it's the ASC is Autism Spectrum Conditions, and conditions was really embraced probably going back about 8 years ago in the UK by a group who was saying, why on earth are we calling autism a disorder? And trying to get rid of that. Being trained in this area as a professional, the terminology, as you'd be aware in the international definitions of autism, is still very much in that language. It's very much autism spectrum disorder. And yet there's so many brilliant thinkers in this area. Simon Baron-Cohen is one of them, saying it doesn't fit. It's not a disorder. If you look at autism, this is actually not an aberration, a mutation on lines that are maladaptive. It's actually the opposite. Why are we calling it a disorder? And I'm so excited to hear someone who's a leader in the field in terms of, a lot of people listening to what he's saying. He informs policy, etc. A professor at Cambridge University saying these things. It's very exciting, and embracing the term neurodiverse. So one thing I've put up a little early, sorry for this slide, is for many years now we have recognised that particularly girls and women who have autism learn to mask it very early on, and for this reason they present incredibly socially skilled, and they can put the mask on. They're very good often at imitation, mimicry. They act. They're very creative in the arts generally, and they do extremely well. But we've noted for a very long time that it's so exhausting that when they get home, they're a completely different persona. So we've kind of talked about it as the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde syndrome or picture, and I think this is an important one to start with, because it speaks to the incredible effort that our young girls face as they go to school and try to be very, very good and to fit in and to make friends and to get it all right. But it's kind of feeling inside, what's wrong with me and why can't I just do this easily? Everything's really, really difficult. And when they get home, they're exhausted and they melt down, and they look very, very different. Of course, a professional coming into this space will look at it and go, well, she's fine at school, it's home that's the problem. And we suddenly have, unfortunately, and I've seen it many times across my career in this area, we have professionals doing a lot of parenting to assist parents to manage her better, because that's where the problem is, that's where the issues are. But the real issue is that trying to be neurotypical when you have autism is exhausting. As this quote says it from one of our girls, it drains me mentally and physically. I am exhausted after having spent a lot of time with others, and I need to recover in solitude. It's Cinderella at the ball at midnight. I can go to the party, but I'll stay for an hour, and then I need to go home. I couldn't send you to your room because that's where you always wanted to be anyway. So typical behaviour management strategies don't work. It's very rewarding. And this is only one element to it. There are many more that I won't be able to describe to you today. But it means that mental health issues become a thing for the person with autism, for the girl with autism. They're anxious, probably innately. I call it now born into an anxious body. As was described earlier so eloquently, it's just there. It doesn't go away. And depression, because where do I fit in this world? No one gets me, no one understands me, and I'm not, what's wrong with me that I have to mask so much? Like, what's underneath the mask that's so hideous that I've got to pretend to be someone else all day? And so anxiety and depression are one of the main reasons that I started Minds and Hearts 15 years ago, because there's nothing wrong with autism. We don't need to treat autism, but we do need to treat the secondaries, as I call them, the result of having autism in a world that doesn't get it. And that's why we see, unfortunately, many of our girls, when they come, or women, come to the clinic and they're exhausted and they're melting down and they've already received many diagnoses, usually. And it's been an enormous search. Around the world now, it's aged 12 and a half years. It's much later than boys that they receive a diagnosis. 12 and a half years is still early, I acknowledge that. But we're getting the boys at around 7 to 8 years old. So there's a huge difference there. And within that gap, there's a lot of room for a person, a woman, a young girl to put in character assassinations about why she's different, to call herself weird, or to start to identify with any of these labels, mental health labels, and to see herself as being defective. So these are just some of the labels that come in, but what's really going on is autism. So in terms of what to do, as a clinical psychologist in this area, we do a lot of work in this area. And one of the huge things that we've found that's so very helpful but such a difficult journey is to embrace the authentic self, to begin to ask the question, who am I? And to sense what the answer is. And that answer is not somebody else's definition of who you are. It's your sense of yourself and who you are. And it's that acceptance of what comes up, what's there, that's the gold. That's the important stuff. That's what's to take care of and nurture and look after and embrace. And there's so much to embrace in autism. So if you want to soar in life, you must first learn to fly. First love yourself. It's hard. Our first speaker today spoke of that journey so eloquently and with strong emotion, because it's so hard. It's a journey, it really is. It doesn't happen instantly. I wish it did, because it would create much better mental health outcomes. But one of the things that we talk about with our guys as they come in is just how insensitive and horrible the terminology is about autism. The definitions, this is called a new View of Aspie. Remembering I'm coming from that school of using the term Asperger's syndrome, which is not used so much now. I acknowledge why. But in terms of the language that comes with it, you can see we have insensitive, obsessive, obstinate, rule-bound, unfeeling. Who wants to be labelled in this way? And yet this is in our definitions of autism at the moment. So we've got a lot of repair to do in this area. We need to talk about the strengths of autism and language it in a way that allows the person with autism to fully own how wonderful they are, whether they're tenacious, nonchalant, objective, precise, steadfast, practical, honest, finely tuned sensory system, and move away from the current ways that we're talking about it. Dysfunctional. Who wants a dysfunctional sensory system? Oh, God. I wouldn't want one of those. But of course it leads to low self-esteem, this sense of I suck at everything I do. I mean, they know in the heart of hearts that's not true. There's always strengths that come with autism, but it feels like I suck at everything I do, and that's the anxious thought, and that's the depression, the low self-esteem. I was afraid to be myself because I thought I wasn't good enough. I was teased unmercifully in grade school because the other students just didn't understand my way of thinking. I don't understand why I don't fit in. My self-identity is based on criticism, not compliments of peers. In our girls' groups that we run a number of girls' groups for increasing a sense of self and identity, as well as self-esteem. And often they've never had a compliment from a peer. Never had a compliment from a peer. And yet we know that that's one of the things that can light you up. Your peer group accept you. They get you for who you are. But of course, that's not easily available within our mainstream schools. As if everyone's masking and we can't embrace autism and can't accept it, it becomes lots and lots of reasons for criticism and invalidation. These ones as well, a sense of, I don't know who I am. Now, this lack of a sense of inner self is for many neurological reasons. These quotes speak of the phenomenon. So, I don't know who I am. I cannot communicate my inner self with those I want to. I'm unable to communicate on a really deep level. I'm afraid to be myself. If they see me for what I really am, they might not like me. So that fear of negative evaluation, of judgment, and a sense that somewhere inside is defective. There's something hugely wrong. And so what we are trying to do when we meet a girl, a woman on the spectrum, is recognise this for what it is, a sense of not being part of the community because feeling I can't come out from behind the mask, I have to camouflage. And there's often a deep grief as a person comes into their knowledge and understanding of their autism, that they suddenly recognise just how hard it's been, the work of it. And they begin to grieve, truly grieve for what has been lost, that they haven't been able to live as their authentic selves throughout their lives. Now, why is this the case? Why is it hard for a person to have a sense of self? Why is it hard to answer the question, who am I? One of the reasons we know is because as we look at the person's qualities and abilities, we've coined the term at the clinic with Tony Atwood and I, Alexi persona. So as much as someone can have alexithymia, which is a difficulty to put into words one's own thoughts and feelings, we can have a sense of lack of words for the personality characteristics of ourselves and others. I don't know who I am. I don't describe myself in terms of personality characteristics. And I don't define myself by my social roles. So who am I? And as you can imagine, if one is wired differently, innately, not to easily put these things into words, then how do you explain yourself to others? But also, who are you as you go into your life and fulfill the roles and the various things that you have to do? Who are you? What you become is a people pleaser. You start to get the tics from other people, and you also become very sensitive then to what other people label you and what they think of you. So the fear of negative evaluation is massive because it's how you define yourself, by their opinion, but not by our own opinion. And it's our own opinion that matters. We're very much living in a social world, and social reality and the reality of who we are is construed. We need validation, recognition, and a mirror up to the sense of self to know who we are. And that's why I fully endorse already the descriptions from our second speaker today about finding your tribe, about knowing who you are and having others reflect back to you who you are, because that's where you get the sense of it. You sense it because others can see it and it's validated. Invalidation, marginalisation is a huge issue when you have autism. We need to be recognised for who we are. So the lack of personality qualities, one of the things that we do in our groups, we run lots of groups for our girls. Being Me is one of them. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And we give them lots of activities to try to get a language for who they are. And it's interesting, while they may not be able to easily recall that or think about it, when you give a list of positive personality adjectives, the person can often reflect and say, yes, I am like that. And so we will give them lists of, there's lots of these on the internet, they're readily available. Are you adventurous, affectionate, ambitious, articulate? And we're doing this from very early days because we want that beginning, we want a foundation, we want it to start at age 7 to 8 years old. But often, as I say, we don't meet our girls on the spectrum, our autistic girls, until they're in their teenage years. And we start to talk about, who are you? What are your positive personality attributes? We start a This Is Who I Am book the quality in personality, abilities, but also in your aspirations, your aspirational self, your values, your goals. What defines you? What do you stand for? What are your beliefs? How do you express that? What are the behaviours that express that? And then we'll look at, and all of these, this is just a few, but obviously in autism, kindness, caring, that empath personality, that compassionate carer is so much a part of it. Enormously loyal, wonderful friend, and honest. But they're not usually defining themselves in this way because of the labelling in autism, with those negative labels I put earlier, and also the stigma in our society and the need to mask. They have amazing abilities, as both of our speakers earlier just this morning have showed you. So many abilities, the silver lining in the sense of the cloud of autism. And then because I'm really into paper because I'm old and old-fashioned, but you can have an app for this. An app's good. You can do it on the computer, but we put the quality, whatever it is, compassionate, huge, beautiful heart. What's your signature strength? And we put that up on the first page, and we start to develop a sense of what are the examples of the expression of that quality. How do you show this in your life, to yourself, to your friends, to your family, to your cats, to your horses, whomever it is. Photographs, copies of reports and grades, any compliments. What we're trying to create here is a vivid visual and potent volume, a book that speaks of what's really going on, that you can read and reflect on and feel, this is going on, this is me, this is a sense of who I am and what I have. And we do this for each of the strengths, the qualities, the abilities, and as a project on self. And it's very, it's a project, it's a piece of work, it's effortful, but it needs to be done. Because when we look at the research for our girls and guys on the autism spectrum, they have differences in the link up to the hippocampus, which affects autobiographical memory. And one of the issues can be, I don't remember a lot of the information here. I don't remember a lot of the positives of what's happened in my life. There can be an over-reflection on the traumatic, the negative, the difficult aspects of life. And that becomes how they define themselves. There's something wrong, and life is difficult, and this perpetuates anxiety and depression. What we need is a strong reminder of all the times we got it right, all the times it worked, our successes, our achievements, the people that like us, because that's not easily encoded in long-term memory. The memory structure for that is weaker, and we need to strengthen it. And a lot of our girls are visual, so we'll do it through a visual means. We do this with not just for themselves and what they reflect, but what their family members think of them, and also they bring a hero, Wonder Woman, Wonder Woman, for example, Dr. Marvel, whomever is a hero. What is it about that person that you love? What are their qualities? And we will record vivid examples of those qualities as well, of examples of how they express that quality behaviourally. We need visual, immediate recognition and embedding in memory. We encourage a self-affirmation pledge that we can take as an intention. So living intentionally, no longer ticking the boxes for somebody else, but living as your true, authentic self and what is important for you, whatever that is. And this is one from Leanne Holiday Willie, one of the pioneering women who wrote the first book by a woman on the spectrum about autism, called Pretending to be Normal. And she said this: I am not defective, I am different. I will not sacrifice my self-worth for peer acceptance. I am capable of getting along with society. I will ask for help when I need it. I will be patient with those who need time to understand me. That's hard. It's hard to be not understood. I will accept myself for who I am. And taking that as a creed, and that's one's own creed. And so we encourage our girls, our women, to write their own creed and to have a sense of what they live for, what they stand for, what will help them as they move through. So we're running Being Me groups a lot. I love groups, although I know, many people will say to me, autistic girls and women will say, I don't do groups, I don't like groups, don't want to do groups. Fair enough, I get that, that's okay. However, it's kind of different, which has been described already today, if you're in your own tribe. It's different. And that's what we find. So we start, and there's fear in the room, because especially with teenage girls, they're in a room with the enemy, and they're looking around going, who's going to hurt me first and how? And this is very scary for them, and they're amazing in their courage to come. And sometimes they can't come. There needs to be some other work done first to work on that anxiety to be able to come. But once they come, we've had girls in the group who, this is the first time they've had true friends. This is where they meet their tribe. This is where they connect. And as teenagers, usually mum and dad are still the social diarists. They're managing the social diary. So when the girls get together, it's organised by someone else. But it's happening. And there's a friendship, there's peer friendship, which is so important for that sense of self. Someone sees me, appreciates me, and validates me for who I am. I am no longer marginalised. I can be my true self. And this is the feedback we get. We usually only spend an hour with participants. It's not a hugely long group. It fits with the energy for it. There's a lot else going on. They're going to high school. We spend half an hour with the parents to describe the activities, ensure there's take up at home. And our first goals of the group are all about what are your strengths, what are your personality qualities, as well as what are your challenges and what strengths can you bring to those challenges, your values, your goals, and what are some of the things that puzzle you about your peers. We call it puzzling peers. Why do they talk about that stuff? Why do I have to listen when it's so boring? And trying to talk about what I'm interested, which is not always interesting to others. So there's that shared compassion. It's hard. I'm with all these boring people at school. How silly and juvenile they can be, and other ways that they consider themselves different to their peers. So there's a sense of solidarity, of, God, it's not just me. There's others who experience this in a deep way, and it's challenging. How does being different affect you? We talk about femininity and gender. The topics for this have all been guided over the years by the participants themselves. We write the sessions just before, a week before, so we're really matching to what's coming up. Gender fluidity is coming up enormously, so we're often spending a lot of time on that in terms of identity. And another one that comes up a lot is empathic attunement, being extremely sensitive to the emotional atmosphere. Tony's going to talk about that later today. There's advantages to being an empath, but it's exhausting. And it's really important to learn how to put up some boundaries so we're not absorbing the energy and emotions of everyone else, and kind of being able to learn how to tease out your own emotions from others so that there's not that flooding going on every day. Another vehicle that we use is character as an animal. I love this bit. And so Charlotte, for example, described herself as a cat. I'm individual, I'm beautiful, I'm a loner, I love to purr, I'm cuddly, I'm sometimes too affectionate. Charlotte's adorable, and you can read the others. Carly was a monkey, playful, funny, cheeky, likes bananas. Shelby, a leopard, strong, independent, like my own kind, have spots, she's freckly. So it's nice because these are girls, when you say, who are you? It's like, no idea. Which animal are you? Look at the richness of the description. So much easier to describe self. We do these wonderful posters. The girls love them. It's your colour, what's important to you, very visual. This is one from Imogen. She loves all the blues and purples, and she loves Harry Potter. She's a red panda in her description. So, and then, yeah, thank you, yay, I agree, yay. So very proud of this book, very proud of this book. I better stop, I've gone too long. But I'll leave you on, that's the book to buy. It's awesome. Thank you.
That is the book to buy. Hopefully we can get a copy to give away on Yellow Ladybug's website. Always hustling. Hustle, hashtag hustle. Speaking of hashtags, if anyone is using social media to share some insights today, make sure you hashtag Yellow Ladybugs, hashtag Symposium. What did I put on the social story? I can't.
Hashtag Yellow LYB Mental Health Symposium.
Nice and long. Yep, thank you. Hashtag YLB Mental Health Symposium would be great. Thanks, Penny. I think you're doing live tweeting, aren't you? Awesome. Go, Penny. Thank you, Penny, one of our Yellow Ladybugs ambassadors. Oops. Okay, no, that's not it. All right, so I'm just going to get onto the slides. Hold on. Okay, that's the right one. Okay, so thanks so much, Dr. Michelle. That was really good, and I'm so grateful to have you here today. So I also want to introduce you now to someone I actually met today, but I've only recently met and heard some really great things about, Shadia. Shadia was diagnosed at the age of 3 with autism and anxiety. At 14 years of age, is that right?
So 14 generalised anxiety disorder and age 3.
Thank you, yes. Having recently completed Year 12, I believe, your greatest passions are working with horses, spending time in nature, art, music and writing. And she's definitely one passionate ladybug, a true role model if I've ever met one. So I'd like everyone to welcome Shadia to the stage.
Can I use the clicker? Is that on? Yep. Hi everyone, so excited to be here today. In this talk I'm going to be speaking on supporting the wellbeing of autistic girls, guided by my own personal experience being on the autism spectrum. So I found out about that's me. So as you can tell, I was just born to be out in nature. I used to go around with bark and just play with the bark. Plants were much more interesting than people, sorry. I found out my diagnosis at 8, actually. I discovered it at my primary school in life skills class. I saw a sign up that had autism, and I thought about that word and I thought, And because I was part of this special life skills program full of autistic boys, I was the only non-boy there, and I got home and asked Mum, are they autistic? And she said yes. And I said, do I have autism then? And she said yes. And very honest, thanks Mum, love it. And so I didn't really think much more of it until about grade 6 and grade 7, the transition to high school and the troubles with friendship I started to have. My self-esteem started to decrease. That's when I learnt more about my anxiety, which often led to depression and that sort of thing. And I wanted to learn more about what my autism meant and who I was, essentially. And I started reading a lot of autobiographies by autistic people. Temple Grandin's a huge inspiration to me, and it's great to see that there are more autistic women now writing. I then met my autistic female mentors at the age of 13, one who's in the audience today, thanks Penny. And so I finally felt like I belonged to something, my tribe, and I think this is incredibly important when it comes to mental health. I actually asked one of my friends who's now going through the arduous process of getting a diagnosis what it felt like to not be diagnosed at a young age. And I want to put their insights up because I think it's so important to understand the power of diagnosis. I do believe that the sooner you learn the diagnosis, the better, because then we can learn to love ourselves. I had an understanding parent and benefited from knowing my autism from a young age. And what I've generally heard, as you've heard from the speakers this morning, the later diagnosed individuals, whilst it's a difficult process, they've generally felt a positivity of relief, and it's put their past into perspective, essentially. And then it opens up a community full of support and friendship and acceptance. Some of the messages to emphasise if you're wanting to tell your ladybug that they're on the spectrum is that we're not abnormal, our brains wired differently. Autism has existed throughout history, it's not something new. There are many individuals that have been key hallmarks in history that have helped keep the world going round, that have been on the spectrum most likely, and I think this is a comforting notion. We're not defective or broken, but unique and beautiful. Anxiety is a really big one. I actually found myself using some of the techniques today on myself. It's not something you grow out of, it's something that you continually manage. I think one of the best ways is to learn preferred methods of communication. It's not necessarily through speaking always, and it can change. Pretty much when I'm in a high state of anxiety, I can't talk, I go mute, and talking actually triggers me further. So what can really help is removing us from the stimulus, such as moving out of our space, encouraging us to go to our room, maybe get a drink of water, that sort of thing. And I usually then text my mum, email her, and then record my thoughts in my diary, which is really helpful when I put my thoughts down to writing. And let's see, where am I up to? And another thing that can be very anxiety-inducing for a lot of autistic individuals is unexpected situations. We don't like change, and we're often not, if we don't have tools in our toolbox to cope with change, then we can go to full-out meltdown and that sort of thing. And one of the things that I've learned about myself is it's not always obvious when I need help. So even today, it looked like I was pretty calm, but inside I was doing all my self-help techniques. And in the classroom, it may be assumed we don't need as much help because we don't present like the autistic boys do. And so there was a particular moment that I had with my mum when I was about 15, and I surprised her. We were getting to the point where I was getting pretty independent. I could catch public transport. I was pretty good. And she had to have this meeting at the staff school, and she said, okay, wait at the front, my friends will pick you up. I waited at the front, they didn't turn up, I waited more and more until it was 6 o'clock in the evening. Then it finally occurred to me, probably should ring my mum as it's about dinner time, and she said, why didn't you call me, why didn't you do anything? I said, because you told me to wait there. So, just as she thought that I was getting the hang of it, surprise you again, Mum. So even now I still need my action plans. I have my what if situations. If I'm going somewhere new, I'll have a scenario planned out in my head. I have a phone the friends strategy, so I have a list of close people that I will go down my list. And it was good because I was with my autistic friends one day and there was a fire drill, which is horrible. And I went down the list. I think I got down to number 5 and I finally got someone. And I rang Mum, said, it's okay, we got to number 5, it's all good. So it's really helpful having action plans and scenarios and talking it through with your child. Some of the great things that technology has brought us is assistive technology, especially when it comes to in the classroom. What I've often found, even with working with my mentees, is that they get very down because they're not keeping up in class, or with writing can be a big issue, especially with those with dysgraphia. And so one of the great things about computers is that typing's much quicker than writing. There's even things like dictation software, voice to text, and I'd greatly employ any educators in the room to let them use it. I found that from a young age, I really benefited from guided meditation. I would focus on one sense at a time. I find that with a lot of meditation exercise out there, focuses on 3 senses at once, which to neurotypicals might be slowing down, but for us it's pretty normal. So we're already overwhelmed by all the senses. We don't need it amplified in a meditation exercise. So what I've found is, if I'm focusing on a sound, I'll close my eyes, and I found it's really good because it brings your emotions and anxiety down to a level you can start to observe them, and then, of course, build strategies from that. Even things like, if you have a favourite food, noticing its texture and taste, kind of like that scene in Ratatouille where he gets the strawberry and there's all these colours flying off it. That's what I've been doing recently as well. Introception, identifying emotions. Introception is the sense of your inner state of the body, being able to read your body, such as when you're hot, cold, hungry, and full. And it's also tracking your emotional state, which can be very tricky, especially if we're in varying states of depression or anxiety. So things like when you're sad, happy, angry, or ecstatic. And this is where I found focusing on outward signs to gauge my emotional state's really helpful. So even in the car today, I was thinking, okay, my jaw's clenching. What does that mean? Okay, it means I'm anxious. Okay, what do I do? And then I worked through my signs and I became my ultimate observer. And they could be biting nails, jiggling legs, pacing, all that sort of thing. And from a young age, I benefited from using an emotions thermometer, which there's one there, but I had a simpler one when I was little, so it's like a 1 to 5 thermometer, but I found it was really helpful to have like a visual emotional tracker, if you like, and so over time it's become more complex and I've been able to use a 1 to 10, but I just find it's a really helpful visual that appeals to our strengths, and we're able to track it better too, which is great. Colour can also be a great way to represent emotions, so things like art therapy can be really powerful because if we're very visual and creative, this can be a great way to get our emotions down onto paper. And some strategies that I have developed for dealing with negative emotions and fixative thoughts, which are very damaging to our self-esteem, is giving it a time limit. So I say to myself, okay, I'm really anxious about this social situation that occurred or this event that happened. I'll give it a 10-minute time limit. I won't judge them. I won't try to suppress them. I'll just let them flow in. Then I go and do something enjoyable. And then if I'm still anxious afterwards, I can ask my close people for help and talk about what might have happened. So this is just one way that you can help deal with negative emotions. And it's also important that, and I find this with animals too, if you get them down to a low state where they're not highly anxious, especially with highly sensitive animals, if you don't give them strategies to deal with it, they actually can go into shock. So a lot of interesting work's been done in various rescue organisations, and what they've found is when they've gone into an area of peace, they've actually developed stomach ulcers and colic and things because they've finally released all these emotions but don't have any strategies to deal with them. And I think it's similar when you are dealing with autistic individuals because we're also very sensitive and highly attuned too. So working out positive stimming or self-regulation, we all stim. It's just the degree to which we stim, which is different. So things like finger flicking, leg tapping. I'll often pace in my presentations, which helps me focus. Using our sensory toys, as Clem talked about before, using time out. I had a very similar chill out pass in high school, and it was signed by my principal because I just found it too hard to ask for help verbally. It just was too much for me, and I used to get embarrassed and stuff. So it's a great way to just have a chill out pass, go to a designated space, have some chill out time. Walking out into nature, talking to animals, we're often great with animals, deep pressure, chew toys, and using communication cards as well is really great. My equine mentor created this amazing sort of infographic, if you like, that's called the Inner Tree, and the idea is that it tracks your different emotional states, such as, so it's like, well, for all you Star Wars fans out there, it's like the light side versus the dark side. So you have, so yeah, it's cool because now I feel like a Jedi talking about it, but you have your shadow side and then your grace side, and the good thing about it is it shows me what negative emotions are. And if I'm starting to feel braced, for example, this will lead to shutdown. If I'm starting to feel panicked or anxious, it's going to have a major disassociation meltdown episode. Likewise, I can see what I should be feeling if I'm positive and well balanced. So you can make a more simpler one for your bud, but I just really like the way that she represented this. Self-esteem is one of the biggest issues I see in terms of mental health, and I think the role that we can play as parents and educators can really help us. One of the exercises that's very similar to what Michelle was talking about earlier is listing what you love about yourself, what you're proud of, your passions. It could be what you've improved on in the last few months or the last couple of years, achievements. And I think doing this as a family exercise or even with your close friends is really helpful, especially when you start to get into that fixative mode. So now what I say to my friends when they're getting there is I say, okay, what do you like about yourself? I'm going to start listing things, you go now. And it's actually helped us learn more about ourselves and also help identify when we get into those negative states. I think too, you've got to be really careful how you give feedback. You need to phrase it in a good way and give it context, because we find it very hard often to take critiques without taking it personally, especially if we value our work highly. So if it's in an area of passion or anything, the worst thing you can say to us is that, oh, you're bad at it. Because that's how we'll interpret it, even if it's, if you need to give context to it. My art teacher was great like that. She never criticised me or said my methods were wrong. She phrased it something like, you can explore this area a bit further. However, I really like what you did with the brush technique. So I still felt good about myself, and I felt it's more an area of growth rather than something to be ashamed of. And I'm clumsy, so I just dropped my time timer. Told Mum I wouldn't do that, but there you go. Be specific. So don't just say things like you're so gifted or you're so talented. Say, I love the use of bright colours in your artwork. I like that particular dance routine. Otherwise, we may not know what you expect of us, and this could cause anxiety in itself. So just a food for thought there. Teen life, yay, not. I don't really know many autistic individuals that really enjoyed the transition from child to teen, I guess. And I just found my peers so unrelatable. Like, they were so weird. Overnight, everything became sexualized, and I didn't get it. They didn't like Disney anymore. What's with that? Seriously, they started thinking about boys and friendships and rivalries and really just time-wasting stuff. So suffice to say, that didn't make me very popular. So unfortunately, quite a few autistic individuals are bullied. Around one survey and research suggested about 60% or 68%. And it's difficult for us because when we don't know why they're bullying, if we've got low self-esteem, we'll immediately think it's our fault. And this can be especially damaging because if we don't know the context behind it, we might just continue feeling down about ourselves. And I think another thing is girls bully differently to boys. So often a lot of the strategies that would be useful when dealing with a verbal or physical bullier does not help with girls, because a lot of it's behind the scenes. It's kind of emotional, psychological, things like exclusion from groups and very confusing things that we can't relate to. And I think it's very important that we emphasise it's a problem with the bully, not the victim. Because we may not think this ourselves, even though it might seem intuitive to you. Emphasise to your child that it's not their fault and provide different perspectives. I think this is really, really key. One of the great things is that I use my special interest of horses to study human behaviour. So I started looking at horses and how they react to one another. And I came with an epiphany that the bullies are actually the most insecure individuals. The true leaders are actually the peaceful ones. So when I realised this, I thought, okay, I have to become a good leader. How do I become a good leader? And so there was this particular bully that I'll call her Claire, but anyway, my Italian friend was over at the time, and I came home crying. I said, I don't know why she's doing this to me. And I told her that this thing had happened where I'd been at school and I'd been walking past daydreaming, and she came up to me and went, and it was very traumatic for me because I didn't know what had happened. And she said, oh, so she's the super bra. And I just couldn't stop giggling because every time I walked past her, I just thought of super bra. And I love David Attenborough, so it reminded me of that moment where the gibbons show their red behinds, and it's like, I'm ready to mate. And so then when I realised that actually it was her problem, not mine, I started developing techniques to not ignore her, but show her I didn't really care. I think it's really important to find good friends, and these are often people who are neurodivergent. A lot of my friends are neurodivergent, and if they're not, I have diagnosed them. So it's really important to find friends with shared passions and special interests. Often, going to clubs during school is a great outlet because, you actually want to be there as opposed to normal classes where a lot of students are just put in there and don't really want to be there and that sort of thing. And I particularly found jazz club really empowering for me in learning things like collaboration. It really pushed me out of my comfort zone because jazz doesn't have any structure really. You have a couple of chords and you have a feeling, but there's no wrong notes and you make the wrong notes sound right. And for someone who was always fastidious in playing the right notes, it really made me more aware of another side of music. But it also showed me that I could actually collaborate with people. I started to tune into what other people were doing in music. Being part of a band was really great. And I actually made great friends there that I'm still in touch with today that I might not have met through it in other contexts. And I think the great thing about using our special interests and passions is that we can become quite social when people are talking about what we want to. We don't do small talk, we do long talk. So if we're a part of a club that, we can totally be ourselves in and just go mad with our special interests, suddenly we're the cool kids. We're the ones that know everything. I remember because my school that I went to was a bit different and there was a boy who wanted to do physics in year 12. And so when he was only in year 8, or year 7. So obviously very bright. And I makes me feel better. And he apparently the kids said, the principal asked, how do you feel about this? And they said, oh, it's a bit weird. And he said, why? He said, he knows more than we do. So I think it can be really great having that outlet, special interest groups and that sort of thing. Yeah. How to start with this one? Floating's really confusing because it's not really logical and I still don't get it. If you know how to describe it, please tell me. But I think navigating that world when there are so many complex signals and it's starting to change, we're already finding it hard to keep up as it is in high school. It can be really difficult, especially if we are able to discern intention, body language and tone separately, we'd probably be very good at it. But the problem is that we're trying to process it all at once, which is really tough. And not only that, people aren't always authentic. So often I'd start getting confused, and what I realised is that their body language was saying something completely different to what they were saying, and I didn't understand why. So I got this intuitive feeling, because I'm empathic, that they weren't really being honest. But yeah, so it can be very confusing. So I found that using my art and scenarios, so using the stick figures and thought bubbles, you don't have to be an artist to do this, and saying, what do you think happened, why did this happen, and that sort of thing. I also found spending time with animals was great because they showed me the complexities of social dynamics, but they're never really, they don't hide things the same as people. So they're actually, for me, a much more reliable source of information about body language and social dynamics, which I'll get into a bit later. Masking is probably one of the main reasons I believe that girls don't get picked up as easily, because we may outwardly appear fine, but we still need assistance in some areas. Often when we're, those who are diagnosed late have masked for so long that their friends assume their masks are who they are, which can make it even more difficult to disclose their autism as well as explain it to friends. I often get the comment that you don't look autistic. And I'm like, what am I supposed to look like, Especially when you've been treated neurotypical your whole life and you're very good at becoming an actor of other people and mimicking, we may not feel comfortable asking for help because we're used to, being who people assume. My echolalia, I was echolalic as a child, so I mimicked speech patterns. Made me a very good masker at primary school, but it started to unravel at secondary school because you can't just replicate speech patterns, and people got very confused at some of the things I used to say. I remember a really funny time when I was with my friend, and he said, "Oh, you know, you and that boy, you seem to be on the raz." And I said, "What does on the raz mean?" He said, "You know, that you like him." I said, "Oh no, I'm like that with everybody." And then I realised, like a second later, I went, "No, not like that." And then I realised that, you know, I was friendly to everyone and people were interpreting it in a different way. I think exploring identity and helping them unmask is really important, especially when they might be going through issues with sexuality, you know, if they might be gender fluid and that sort of thing. And I found things like role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons are really great. I mean, let's be honest, someone on the spectrum wrote that game. It's full of stats and numbers, and the great thing about it's very structured. And because we're actually great at being actors, putting on a character is quite easy for us and we can be quite good at it. And I think one of the great ways is that it's a safe space for us to be vulnerable. So for me, personally I've played the same Dungeons and Dragons character since I started. And it's really taught me a lot about myself and how other people think of me, and you know what are good dynamics, what's leadership and that sort of thing. And I think showing examples of individuals who are on the spectrum who are making change is really important, giving us specific examples if we don't have people in our life on the spectrum perhaps yet. I really related to Hermione and Luna Lovegood in Harry Potter, and Harry Potter became a great way for me to start learning about friendships and what that meant, because the great thing about books is they explain to you what the emotions are and they explain to you what they're going through, so we don't have to guess all the time. So it really helped me especially, and I'm still obsessed with Harry Potter, so yep. So disorganized, okay. A lot of us on the spectrum are very empathic, which means we pick up on the emotions of others quite easily. I can walk into a room and immediately feel anxious, my heart's racing, and I know it's not me. But the problem is if we don't have context on where the emotions are coming from, we might get confused and assume that they're our own emotions. So creating boundaries is really important for us to start separating ourselves from others. And the difficulty with reading others is it can attract people that can drain us. And this can create problems like, well, you know, they're my friend, therefore, you know, that's why they act that way. And this can make us be very vulnerable to becoming therapists for friends and not picking up on toxic situations. And often a lot of us want to change the world. A lot of us are social activists, and a lot of us may go into helping professions. And I think if they're more prone to helping people like that, it can be a good way for that to be a professional outlet as opposed to helping every single friend of yours. If the socialising tires the bug out, just stress to them that they're not a failure for taking time out. Doesn't mean that you're less of a person. We all need our own time, and self-care is as important like physical health is. And I think this is really important thing that I learnt, that your brain health is just as important as your body health, because it's all connected. If we're not healthy up here, it will impact on here as well. Horses, again, as you can see, I'm an expert in weaving my special interest into everything. They actually taught me about how uncomfortable I actually felt with people pushing on my space. So things like if a horse, for example, came up to me, you know, what they'll do as a show of dominance is that they'll push right past you. And I said to my equine mentor at the time, that makes me uncomfortable. And she said, why do you think that is? And I realised that they were pushing me out of my space and not respecting me, and I'd be pushed out. And I think what I took from that is that I need to assert my space, say this is my space and you must respect it, such as starting to stand my own ground. And I was able to translate this to words with people who were stepping on my toes. So that bully I mentioned before, I did very similar things to what very calm leader horses do. I just walked right past her, said, whatever, I'm okay, that's fine. I don't care what you do. And I think eventually it got me to a state where I actually started believing it. Because the great thing is when you start changing your body language, your intention changes as well. I think that's a really empowering thing. Some advice. I think, find your tribe. This is so important. Use tools for identifying emotions. So use stuff like an emotions thermometer, as I mentioned before. Look at outward signs to help your child pick up on their inner emotional state. Use passions and strengths as social opportunities through special interest clubs and societies. Dancing, art and jazz can really help with group work. I think involving their passions can create a positive space because often learning things like collaboration can be a traumatic process, and I think it's really important that we use their strengths to help do it in a positive way. And reframing things like, the fact that we can actually channel our sensitivities into positive ways. So my love of music, for example, I was able to channel into being a very good performer because what I found is that the adrenaline actually helps you keep on going, whereas the other musicians were struggling to keep on going. I was all hyped up and crazy, and it kept me going. So they were just sort of things that helped me realise that there's some amazing things about being on the spectrum, and it's something to be proud of. Definitely make use of positive solutions such as sensory aids, noise-cancelling headphones, tinted lenses or sunglasses, using mindfulness and sensory toys. Really helpful. I still carry them around with me today, and I just get out my fidgets, so I wear sensory jewellery and all sorts of things like that. So yeah, that's about it for me today. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to joining you at question time.